Welcome to Conscious Quest, the LA-based podcast where we aim to stay conscious about everything current. Hello, everyone. You're listening to Conscious Quest, the podcast for seekers. I am one of your hosts, Sarah Parlow.
And I am Rishi. I have to apologize for my voice a little bit. I just got over a cold.
He just sounds very resonant today, folks, and we welcome that. We are back with a topic that I am really excited about. I think that when we talk about our subject today, it has the potential to expand awareness for a lot of people and help them understand how they may be operating in the world. I know for myself, it's helped me understand how I operate in the world, specifically within relationships. And Rishi, tell us what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about attachment styles. And so that's a very relevant topic for most of us, because attachment styles have to do with how we are in relationships. And that could be anything, like a romantic relationship. It could be a friendly relationship. It could be a workplace relationship. And so it's, the theories developed by psychologist John Bowlby and expanded by Mary Ainsworth. It describes the dynamics that we encounter stemming from childhood and how we are as adults.
And this goes way back, like you said, Rishi, all the way to childhood, really kind of to the first several months of our lives. And it has a lot to do with our ability to attach to a primary caregiver or, parental figure. John Bowlby specifically really focused on the mother-child relationship. But I think you mentioned another research, Ainsworth, and she expanded upon that and said it really is just having one primary caregiver, which could be the mother, the biological mother, or an adoptive or foster parent, or the father, or anyone else. So he nailed a few different attachment types, didn't he, Rishi?
That's right. That's right. And so, it depends. Like, so maybe we can talk more about secure attachment. I actually was talking with you just a few minutes before we started, how the vast majority of people, when I say vast majority, I mean like over, I guess, 50% is not going to be like a secure, and secure attachment. It's I mean, kudos to those people who do have secure attachment and also or have developed it, which is something that we can talk about later on. So, Sarah,
Right.
What exactly is secure attachment?
Right. And that's the gold standard, isn't it, Rishi, for attachment styles? And it really boils down to basically our comfort with the absence of the primary caregiver or the parental figure that we first got attached to. And so John Bowlby brings in these kind of four components. He talks about like proximity maintenance, which means our desire to be close to the person we're attached to, and a normal secure attachment style, like we want to be close to the parental figure that we feel safe with. He talks about safe haven. If we become scared or alarmed or activated, we feel comfortable going back to that primary caregiver. He talks about having a secure base, because that attachment style is a form of a secure and safe base. And then separation distress. So in other words, again, when we feel anxiety, when we're activated, we can go back to this parental figure and be soothed. And so what you have from all those four things is that a person with secure attachment style knows that they're loved and that there is a place that they can go to be soothed. And it gives them sort of the courage to go out into the world and feel safe out there and, know that they are worthy and they are loved and that there are ways to soothe whenever they're activated. I don't know. Do you have any more to add to that, Rishi?
How nice is that? I mean, that sounds great, to go out there and be secure and know that you're going to be okay, and you can trust the other person. Believe me, like many people, it's just that is a wonderful thing to have. Mm-hmm. I would say that people who do have secure attachment styles tend to be more stable in relationships, I should say, have more longer lasting relationships. They also tend to have good self-esteem.
Yeah.
They know how to seek social support. They're not afraid, to look outwards, or to at least ask for help or that type of thing, or look for help from their partner. And they can cope well with stress, like separation, from the person that you love, or maybe not, seeing that person all the time, but still having that kind of that trust that relationship is real and is loving and is still there.
Hmm.
That is a lot what secure attachment is, and we can
Right.
develop that. Uh, but I
Right.
would say many people are probably the latter two. I know I've struggled with my own secure attachment stuff, and that's
Yeah.
something that I've had to develop as I've gotten into my own, I guess, like self development, into my own self improvement.
Teaser, folks. We can go into our individual attachment styles later on in the show, but we're just going to set things up for you right now. But what you're really saying, Rishi, is that people with a secure attachment style have high relationship satisfaction.
Yeah, yeah, they do. They tend to have longer lasting and more secure relationships, and yeah, I mean, I think they're probably happier
Mhm.
within it. Less stress, less anxiety would equate to more happy.
Right. And so, fortunately, there's probably at least research shows about 40% of people out there who have a secure attachment style. So they are out there. And why don't we just delve into for a second the types of attachment styles beyond secure?
Yeah, 100%. So attachment preoccupied, that
Mm,
is something where, well, it usually develops where the caregiver is inconsistent, when growing up. They may be warm, they're hot and cold. A lot of times too, like, you can never really blame the caregiver. A lot of our behavior is subconscious, right? It's
yeah,
this unconscious behavior. And so, we should probably refrain from blame. This is just how people are,
yeah,
and so sometimes they don't know what they're doing. They're not aware of what they're doing. And so this is just what happens. And so, what happens for anxious, preoccupied folks is that they're over reliant upon outside sources of reassurance for their own self esteem. They're also anxious and insecure, as like the name anxious and preoccupied attachment means. Um, Usually they wonder or worry that their partner does not love them,
right,
and how many people do you know like that? I know plenty.
right.
Um, there's a
So,
lot of impact to it too. What are the impacts of, I mean, what do you think like the impacts are for anxious, preoccupied attachment?
well, I think for anxious folks, they tend to have extra sensitive nervous systems. They tend to be hypervigilant about everything within the relationship. Therefore, the preoccupied aspect, and they're microanalyzing every little interaction to see if there's any threat of separation, and if
I'd
there
also
is,
say maybe overreading into things as well.
overreading. Yes. Yeah. So fixating. And then a lot of times they will blame themselves if there's anything going on. They have a discomfort with verbalizing their own needs because if they have needs, they might be rejected by the partner. And, I just want to point out all of these attachment styles are a sort of evolutionary development. And it's about trying to be safe in the world. And so with anxious style people, their belief is that if their love object is close to them, and that's imperative for their safety and survival. Would you agree, Rishi?
Oh yeah, yeah. But there might actually be evolutionary benefit to having anxious, preoccupied as well. If you're anxious and preoccupied, that means that you're probably, if you're in a highly dangerous area, for instance, if you're in an unstable area, perhaps with a lot of war, maybe from evolutionary standpoint, maybe an area that doesn't have a lot of resources,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just one of those things that uh, might have over a long period of time trended to keep people safe, which is an interesting standpoint. versus the evolutionary standpoint for the secure attachment would be that you will hold the group, and you want that group cohesion because the cohesion of the group is going to keep you safe.
Right.
So both of those are almost two sides of the same coin.
Right. And then we have the avoidance style as well, don't we, Rishi?
Right.
Can
That's
you,
my favorite one.
We're going to talk about that. But what are the avoidant or the dismissive types like?
Well, I mean, I think that they're more aloof, right? They're people who either from the get-go, perhaps, or maybe have developed it over time, but they're just distant. They're very self-reliant, which is not a bad thing in this world, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, they have discomfort with intimacy, with closeness. They don't really want to talk about themselves. They tend to keep their partners at arm's length, which is interesting because even within our environment, because I have a program that helps people. We have a lot of therapy and a lot of our psychologists. It's interesting how long sometimes it takes some of our clients to even open up to their own therapist, and so perhaps that they're dismissive and avoided, although we haven't really done that analysis on them. It's I mean, it's a way to, I guess, protect one's own emotions and psyche from relationships, and that has to do with like when their original caregiver was probably unemotionally or emotionally unavailable or unresponsive most of the time. Like they were there, but they weren't there.
Right. And so for avoidance, that was just a way to cope, is to kind of be indifferent when the attachment figure actually did show up. It was probably their way internally of just protecting their feelings. It's because this person is not consistent. So I'll just be inconsistent with my attachment, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess like maybe what's the difference between anxious, preoccupied, and dismissive and avoidant?
So I think the anxious is trying to move in and gain more intimacy. And that is actually the thing that triggers and activates the avoidant, is when someone reaches in to get
Makes sense.
close, the avoidant pulls away. And so what happens a lot, and, well, I want to talk about this a little later in the show, avoidance and anxious are like the perfect storm of just complementary, like, I don't know what you would call them, neuroses or whatever. They tend to find each other, and they tend to get into relationships with each other. And they're like the worst persons for each attachment style to be in relationship with, because
Sure.
one is constantly trying to get close and gets their feelings hurt and ruffled when they get pushed away. And then the other one is doing the pushing away. So,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
that's the fourth attachment style, isn't it?
the disorganized.
That's right. Fearful and avoidant.
The worst of both worlds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so those are our four types. And again, I love what you said, Rishi. I mean, you're not even really conscious. It's in the subconscious mind. I mean, it's not like people are choosing this or aware of this. They're just sort of operating from these internal mental models.
Mhm.
But awareness about it is sort of the first step, right? To knowing, like, I fall within this category of characteristics.
Oh yeah, no, self-awareness in any of this is extremely important. And if you're a listener who has a child, and I would say it's very important to really think about how your interactions are with your kid, because if you are happen to be insecure or fearful, avoidant, you can break that cycle for your kid, and have them have a secure attachment style. But of course, like self-awareness is always the key for anything
Yeah.
in our own psychology.
Yeah. I do want to point out that because you have a certain attachment style, and you can do quizzes online in order to help you understand what your attachment style is, or there is an incredible book that both Rishi and I have read. It's called Attached. I forget who wrote it, Amir something.
Hmm.
We'll put
I
that
can look it
in.
up. I don't want to look at my phone, but
Yeah,
it's
we'll
audible.
we'll put it in the show notes, everyone. Um, but the important thing to know is just because you have a certain attachment style, it is a pattern within you, but it's not a sentence for the rest of your life. Attachment styles can shift and change over time, either with you becoming aware and actively working to shift that attachment style, or research shows that being in a relationship with a secure attached partner for a period of time can shift your style to secure. And I've heard ballpark numbers of around 5 years being in a relationship with someone secure. Jury's out. I think it really is on an individual basis. But anything for you to add to that, Rishi?
No, no, I think having a good, secure relationship with someone who's stable,
Mm-hmm.
that's a wonderful thing to have. And so, being open to change as well within oneself. And a lot of times too, this is just not directly on point with attachment style, but we tend to be a little bit defensive when it comes to our own behaviors,
Yeah.
and so we sometimes don't want to face the truth, even because it's difficult to actually face,
Yeah.
especially if it's not very flattering to our own ego. But being honest with oneself, and also forgiving of oneself is very important as well.
Right. Exactly. And so when we're talking about attachment style, again, these are things which are probably set up in early childhood, but can also be impacted by our relationships as adults or certain traumas at any point in life where we just don't have a certain level of safety with a caregiver or with a loved person or someone we're attached to.
The other implications, though, that maybe we can talk about that.
Let's talk.
Okay, absolutely. So cross-cultural variations in attachment. So the attachment style theory it's relevant across all cultures, but there
Mm-hmm.
are variations in it. And so, for instance, like with my culture, Indian culture, what would be considered a insecure attachment um, would be considered, or what would be in the West be considered an insecure attachment would be considered normalized, or normal attachment. For instance, with like my parents love to talk to me all the time, and so I don't mind actually. They want to hear from me, and so that's actually something that's encouraged in the East.
Right.
Like a lot more, talking, and so that would be considered more, insecure attachment in the West. But that's just something that has to do with a collectivist society, um, which is just emphasizes interdependence, um, and so uh,
Versus the rugged individualists of America.
yeah, yeah. For me, like it's just interesting as someone who comes from a immigrant family, an Indian family. It's just people who move out at age 18, you know, um, and then never come back, or they're expected to be fully independent by age 18. To me, like for most Indian folks, like they want to move that number to like 30. you know, Ideally, like most Indian parents, I'm not saying I'm half joking here, but an Indian family would not mind if like the sons or daughters stayed till age 30. That's something that's not weird at all, for Indian folks. I'm not sure about Asian, or Chinese or other, but definitely for South Asian families that would be considered okay.
So a pinch of awareness for cultural differences is
Yeah,
important in looking at attachment style.
that's right.
Yeah. Um, and attachment styles we tend to think of relating mostly to our adult romantic relationships, but they can really come up in all relationships, can't they, Rishi?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think like where, especially in the workplace, we're forced to have relationships with people, and so I would say like if you have a boss, I don't know how many people have bosses. Um, Everyone's had a boss at some point, probably. Uh, Leaders with secure attachment, they tend to have a supportive environment. They tend to create a supportive and trusting work environment, and which is interesting. So this is like through some studies versus those folks, those leaders who happen to be avoidant. They struggle actually with interpersonal relationships at work, and those leaders tend to have a more kind of, I don't want to say fearful environment, but it's not as happy or secure as
That
those
makes
leaders
sense.
with a secure attachment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, there's also more work-related stress when you have a lot of, if your attachment style is insecure, you'll have like the same, you'll reflect about your job security, about your relationships with your colleagues with more insecurity, and then you'll also have more stress related to work because of that.
Right. You had some other points you wanted to bring up. I
Yeah,
thought were
yeah. There's a
interesting.
lot to do. So attachment style theory can be. I mean, it's across. So for instance, like with technology, right now, what some studies have shown is that social media has really affected a lot of folks in a negative way and made people very insecure. Well, I wouldn't say
Mhm.
very. That's not the right word, but it has shifted and probably has pointed people towards the more insecure attachment style. The reason why is because you're when you post something on social media, you want that like, right?
Yeah,
And so if you post something and it doesn't get any likes, how anxious do you become? You know, you're like, oh, did I say something wrong? Am I being rejected by my followers? And all of a sudden you become more anxious because of social media. And
right.
then go ahead.
And the other thing too is the comparison model that happens on social media. You're constantly looking at other people's lives and comparing your life to theirs, and if their life looks better for any particular post or run of posts, it affects your own mental health. So yeah, we could have an entire episode about social media
Oh yeah.
and mental health.
One on the other side of that, on the flip side of that, is that with modern technology, we have FaceTime, we have Zoom, we have obviously cell phone and cellular communications and telephonic communications, and so that has actually helped people maintain their relationships and
True.
so long distance relationships with your family members, your parents, or what have you. It has actually benefited that. So
That's a good point.
that so there's two sides of that.
Mhm.
I'd also say like that's for me, social media. My own personal view, it does cause a lot of issues though, which we don't really we need to address as a society about that.
That's a bigger conversation for
Yeah,
sure.
maybe in a different podcast we'll talk about that.
So I'll just bring up, part of the reason I really wanted to do this episode is I feel my own awareness of attachment style has really affected my quality of life. And just to be transparent with people, I do fall under the umbrella of an attached, anxious, preoccupied attachment style. And I don't think it was anything I really fully grasped until probably my early 40s. And looking back, I think, I saw how things would happen in my intimate relationships, and I couldn't quite grasp or understand them. But the attachment theory model really helped me to see that I was constantly looking for external validation and support from a partner, and made a lot of choices to be in relationship with avoidant partners because anxious avoidants have this kind of perfect, symbiosis that happens, but it's not healthy. And I did notice like how activated my nervous system would be around certain people and how it impacted my mental health. And as a result, I think I became acutely aware of how a lot of times in anxious avoidant relationships, if they do succeed, it's because the anxious person essentially caves to the situation and just does their best to make peace with, feeling somewhat alone and not included because the avoidant wants to keep them at arm's length all the time. And that is one option, but I think one of the really powerful things in that book Attached that I learned is, you know, probably the best practice is just to find a secure attached person and get into relationship with them. A lot of times we think of love in our society as something that creates a lot of excitement and butterflies, and that really is more of a sign of anxiety and activation. And so we tend to think of anxiety and activation as being like passion and love. And to some degree it can, but it can also be really unhealthy in that, I think in my life, and again, it's easy to blame parents and stuff. I don't want to go there. I don't think that that's really healthy. But sometimes we look for a way to recreate the models that we had with our parents in our adult life. So if I felt like I wasn't really seen or heard in some ways, and that I had to constantly grab on for comfort and security, then I should find that as the same in my adult relationships. So I think stepping out of that awareness and recognizing my nervous system can be different in relationship, and love doesn't have to feel anxious, and like I have to be afraid to ask for my needs to be met. I think that was a really empowering thing to go through. One thing I will point out, and this was an interesting thing that happened to a lot of babies who were born around my time, is that when I was born, some children are born with a high bilirubin level, which is sort of a liver breakdown enzyme.
So was I.
So there you go. And so what was very common to do back in those days is you get rid of the bilirubin buildup by putting kids under these lights in an incubator. And the lights kind of like help break down the bilirubin so that it can be excreted, and we didn't know much about attachment style back then. And so today, when babies are born, a lot of times they really encourage skin to skin contact immediately between the infant and the mother. And so I think if you look back at kids from the mid 70s and stuff like me who were born and had an elevated bilirubin, we might be thrown under these lights by ourselves, with no caregiver around, which was what was considered a good practice back then. But even on that deep cellular level, as an infant, might have set up some anxiety about not having my primary caregiver nearby. What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, I can say that's interesting because I had a transfusion as a baby.
Wow.
And I had a high bilirubin count, and I was put underneath like the incubator and whatever for a couple of days while I had the high bilirubin, and so I never really thought about it, but it makes sense. It would explain a whole generation of the Gen Xers. I'm just kidding. Perhaps that's all of our issues. Is that
damn incubator light we got stuck under all by ourselves, no one around, and just babies screaming.
That's right. Well, it is interesting. There is a lot of development that does happen. We know a lot more about infant development at this time, and so yes, skin to skin contact and all that stuff is extremely important. It reminds me of this one crazy story. It wasn't even a study; it was a rich lord, and I think I can't remember what country in Europe, but this is back when they could do whatever they wanted, and so he procured an orphan and proceeded to raise, because what the theory was for this particular lord was that he wanted to see if language was something that was a priori, right? That everyone had, And so this poor kid was raised in a room, was just fed through like a little hole, and like just given, like, I think like something like that to see what would happen to the kid. And obviously the kid didn't do well at all. Like he just wasn't well. And so it's just extremely important that we have these very early childhood relationships with our caregiver and stuff. So yeah, as far as like for me, and I as I've gotten older, I would just say more self aware and more into my own spiritual practices. I've become much more secure,
Mhm.
in my own type of relationships and my own ability to relate to other people and security, especially within a partnership or my own friend circle, within myself or family. That's helped me a lot. Just
Mhm.
understanding, about people. But yeah, yeah. I think I
Yeah.
used to be a little bit avoidant, perhaps, or maybe I was overly secure. I've been all over the place, and I knew I needed to change. And so I had to make that change towards my 30s is what happened.
Right. And I think that's a good point is that attachment styles can shift over time. And so, like you said, awareness, me being aware that I am an anxious attachment person. What I focused on is on ways that I can self soothe rather than looking to external things to soothe me, like people. We all are social creatures. We all need to reach out and connect. And that's important. But there's also that piece of like, we have to also learn to love and be with ourselves, and when those feelings of anxiety come up, to maybe sit with them and interrogate them and even say, "You're welcome." And I'm going to listen to you. What do you have to tell me? Because when we have these sort of things that come up, a lot of times there's a message there. It's kind of our subconscious, our psyche that's reaching out and saying, "Hey, there's this piece of me that still needs to be seen or addressed or whatever."
Yeah, I mean we're all mirrors of each other, and we tend to see in other people what we want to see, and usually what we want to see is usually something that's within us, right? And so if you see, someone who's just not caring enough or whatever, like why are you seeing that person like that? Is it inside of you, or are you reading the situation properly? Are you overreading a situation? What is happening? And so that's always an interesting thing.
So step away from your emotions a little bit, be a little more objective, and that could take you really far.
Yeah.
Any
It's
other things you wanted to bring up, Rishi?
gosh, there is some links between people who have a lot of anxious anxiety, um, and more insecure attachment. They tend to have a little bit more mental health issues.
Mhm.
There is that correlation there. They tend to have a lot more anxiety, um, or enhancing that enhances depression, which makes sense if you're very unsure about your relationship. You might become very very anxious in life, or perhaps develop depression. So it's just something to talk about. If you do have these, if you do have depression or have anxiety, have a therapist, or perhaps are going to look into your own research into it and get your own books and go online or buy, whatever you do. Maybe just think about how your attachment is, and uh, but anyway, that's my point, is that there is a correlation with that.
Right. And we've talked a lot about the anxious style folks, but specifically for the avoidance, I just want to nail some characteristics so people can really zone in on that. People who are avoidant, again, we've mentioned that when people get close, they sort of feel the need to pull away because they don't feel safe with intimacy. And so a lot of times the characteristics you'll see is that avoidants really value self sufficiency and can at times look down on their partner for being less self sufficient. Or, in other words, they'll start devaluing partner and saying that they're too needy or too much or whatever, as sort of their own self defense mechanism. And so they'll sort of push people away in that regard in order to, kind of soothe their own discomfort around, I guess, receiving in a way.
Yeah, well, by avoiding, you won't get hurt. It's like those people who never, like, if you never try something, you'll never fail, right?
Right.
So it's more about like fearing a loss. So if you never enter a relationship, or if you avoid a relationship or avoid intimacy, then there's nothing to lose, right?
So, one of the keys for avoidance is to recognize that their system is being activated and to recognize that they do need love and intimacy. And also, I think an important component is to communicate with your partner what your needs are, because sometimes it's all a lot of misunderstanding. And if we talk about things and say, hey, I need a little space right now, I think most reasonable partners can recognize and understand that. But it's about verbalizing what's happening within your own emotional landscape to clue the other person in. And, again, I do think that this book, Attached, is revolutionary and can help a lot of people. And I think there's a lot of scenarios that it paints in the book, which people can easily identify with.
I can agree with that. Yeah, it's a wonderful book.
Any closing thoughts, Rishi?
Well, I think that just being self-aware, be forgiving of yourself, be easy on yourself. I think that once you become aware of your attachment style and finding a good therapist, or just doing your own therapy if you want to get your own resources and self-contemplation, and be forgiving of yourself, and also be forgiving of other people as well. No, people they're not conscious of what they're doing sometimes, right? So we can forgive them, and we can wish them well, if on their journeys. We're all on a journey.
Right. And also just think about what your needs are and be able to verbalize them. I think a good thing for us to do would be to include a little quiz in the show notes of this episode so that people can take a quiz and see what their own attachment style is roughly. And again, knowledge is power. So with that, I think we will say goodbye for today. But Rishi, we have a fun topic for next time, don't we?
That's right. If you can remind me again, like one more time, what it is. Because we have a lot of topics.
You have a hypnotherapist that works for
That's
you.
right. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, we have several topics. So I don't know sure if it was the next one or not. So we do have a special guest coming up. Her name is Mila Reback, and she's a trained hypnotherapist who's been working in the mental health space for the last several years. Very, very fascinating subject. And hypnotherapy is, just so you know, I'll give you a little teaser. Hypnotherapy was the thing from like the early 1900s up until the 50s, before CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, came into the rage, right? So people always want the newest and brightest thing, which was CBT. But before that, hypnotherapy was the thing. And another big thing about hypnotherapy is that it is effective. It is effective, and you can look at studies, and insurance will even pay for very short-term stints of hypnotherapy, especially when it comes to smoking cessation. So it is effective, and it's not the type of hypnotherapy. Hypnotherapy is not the thing that you see on the shows, but we'll let Mila explain more of that next time.
And what I'm really excited about for that episode is we really can talk about the subconscious mind, how it works, and how it can ultimately be the thing running or sabotaging our lives. And so once again, we're aware of that fact, we can figure out the things that we do want to change and make efforts to change them. And how you reprogram the subconscious mind is a little different from what we do in conscious waking moments. So I hope these are some fun teasers for everybody to tune in for our next episode. By all means, dive into attachment style theory. And if you are one of those secure people, that's incredible. Again, that's the gold standard. That's where we all want to be. But for those who are not, again, having this knowledge is powerful. So thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Hope you have a wonderful week and weekend.
Stay conscious.